Great. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the kickoff for the regional housing study that will be coordinated by TJPDC and completed by the Virginia Center for Housing Research for our region. So I first just wanted to welcome you all and thank you for being here with us today and for your interest in what we'll be doing with this study. And we hope that you will participate throughout the coming 2 years in every way possible. And I wanted to hand it off to Christine Jacobs, who is the executive director at TJPDC, to have some opening words.
Thanks, Lori Jean. Christine Jacobs, Executive Director here. For those of you that I have not met, really grateful just to start off with for you all to, take your time to spend with us today to kick this off. We've got a good mix on here of staff and elected officials, planning commissioners, nonprofit service providers, others, just which shows, how complex this issue is and how many people need to come to the table to help identify solutions. I'm excited to be kicking this off. As many of you know, the last comprehensive planning study that was done in our region was in 2019. We can all attest that much has changed since then and continues to change. So this planning process is really designed to be really collaborative and solution focused. And we recognize that no two communities within our region are the same. A lot of times we hear the difference between urban or rural, but we definitely understand that even our rural communities are very distinct and unique from one another and the pressures that they're facing. And same with our urban jurisdictions, they're not the same. Some communities are grappling with rapid growth and pressures that it places on their land, roads, and their longtime residents. Others are seeing young people move away and schools with decreasing enrollment and aging homes where younger folks aren't staying to buy those lined up to buy them. So for all of us, housing has become more complex and more complicated of an issue to solve. It's harder to build, it's more expensive to build, and in some cases, the product is more out of step with what people need and or can afford. So we're really excited to kind of all come together to look at, identify, and address some of the challenges that you're each uniquely facing, and then likewise that we're all collectively facing as a region and frankly as a Commonwealth and in the US. This is not unique to us. So I would like to take a moment just to make sure I thank the contributors to this study. We've gotten really great support and grants from Virginia Housing and the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as local contributions from the member jurisdictions that are participating in the study. So again, really happy to have you guys, really happy to be working together with you on this and learning alongside you, more about the communities that we all share boundaries with. Everybody works, lives, and plays within the region. We may reside in one, but we're crossing these boundaries every day. So what one jurisdiction does and how they address what their challenges are do affect us all. So thank you very much for being here, and I will bring it back to Lori Jean. Lori Jean, you are still muted.
Thank you. We're really excited to present to all of you about this study. I'm just going to give a really quick overview and just introduce you to who we are and what we're planning to do next, and then I'll hand it over to the researchers. So this is your team moving forward. Mel Jones is leading our team from the Virginia Center for Housing Research at Virginia Tech. She is a research scientist and the co-director of VCHR. She has led many similar housing studies across the country and throughout the state of Virginia, so you're going to get to hear from her today. Jonathan Knopf is also here. He is going to be a central partner on our team as well. He's from Housing Forward Virginia, and he serves there as the executive director for programs. In this role, he helps local officials, planners, and community members craft evidence-based policies and design effective communication strategies. So we're really excited to have him on board as well. And then as well as your TJPDC team, which includes three of us who will be working behind the scenes and helping coordinate the process. Ruth Emmerich is here. She is the Chief Operating Officer and Program Director. Logan Endy, who is a regional planner, and then myself, I am the Regional Program Manager. So this study is really about giving each community the tools that it needs to plan ahead. No one's going to be handing down any one size fits all solutions. This is a collaborative process, and we're really excited to have a team who has done this type of collaborative process in so many places and is really curious to understand what our local needs are. So we are really going to understand what's happening in each place, each part of our region, the pressures, the patterns, and all of our different priorities. We are going to try to use this study to equip each locality with better data so that you can be making decisions based on facts and not just frustrations, and to better prepare for the future altogether. And then ultimately, you'll get to hear a lot from Jonathan today about how we're going to create strategies that reflect your values and your vision, whether that's protecting the rural character, making sure there's affordable housing for all, making sure that younger families can stay in our region, or preparing for the needs of our older populations. So this is going to be a real brief overview of the timeline, and Jonathan will go into much more depth. But I just wanted to make sure you all know that by March of 2026, when we're about a year in, we will have completed phase 1 here. So you will have a preliminary draft of the needs assessment, of the literature review, as well as updated data for all of the localities to access. So even though this is ultimately going to be a 2-year process, there will be lots of information that becomes available along the way for everybody who's involved. So you don't have to wait until the end of the 2 years for the final report to have useful data and information. Also, by the end of March in 2026, we will have done a fair amount of data training with Mel. Part of what's amazing about how they do these studies is that they don't just want to leave us only with a study. They want to leave us with strategies, but they also want to leave us with knowledge and skills that we didn't have before. So staff from TJPDC, from all of the localities, as well as some of our nonprofits, are stepping in and participating in these trainings where they will both be learning how to collect data as well as doing a little bit of analysis, and doing some homework to help contribute data to the study as well while learning how to do these things. So that means that in the future we can do more of our own updates locally. And we can also have additional skills to gather data and use it for grant applications or policy development or other purposes that we need. So that's all just going to happen within the first year. And again, there's more that Jonathan will cover later. After the end of the second year, by March of 2027, we will have a final toolkit of strategies for each participating locality. And of course, the full comprehensive report. We have not done this since 2019. So we really want to have a thorough look at our region. And not only will we have this really comprehensive report that comes out in the end, but we'll also have a consumer version that can be more accessible to just any member of the public who wants to know more about what we found. So we're really glad that you're all here and that our entire region is participating in this study in one way or another. We have folks on our project management team. We have folks who are doing listening sessions, and every locality has written a letter of support for this project. And we're really grateful for how you have already been part of this. We're definitely going to be looking to you for input in the coming 2 years, but also just for partnership, especially once we get to the strategies section. We really want that to be something that lots of key, stakeholders and members of the community are part of, to really make sure that we're meeting our shared goals for housing. So just to summarize, the study really matters because housing affects every part of our communities, from who can work and go to school here to the health and safety of families. It's not just going to be numbers on a page. We really want this to be applicable. And it's about the real people who are facing real challenges in life. So we hope that this study will give us the facts and the tools that we need to confidently make our plans, make smart investments, and shape a future where all of our constituents can thrive. So with that said, I am excited to welcome Mel Jones, who is going to share more about the context for this study.
Thanks, Lori Jean. So thank you guys so much for having me. Lori asked me to give some context. What we've been seeing as we think about housing across Virginia and beyond. Jonathan and I have worked together in collaboration in almost every single part of Virginia for feels like many years now. And what I'm going to show you is over those years, what I have observed being the core of many people's housing concerns. And I've separated them into concerns around households themselves, the people who live in the units, the sticks and bricks, the units, and then also the community perspective. My background is in planning and in economics, and you will see that at every turn of the way I frame things. But it's certainly not the only way to look at housing issues. And as Lori Jean was talking, I was thinking to myself, you know, the first time that we trained local staff and stakeholders to do this analysis themselves was in Des Moines, Iowa. And what came out of that study was, you know, the folks there certainly learned about all the data and how to analyze it. But because they have different perspectives and different experiences, when they did the analysis, they brought a different perspective, a different way of presenting the data. And at least one of those presentations of data has been carried through even to this day, the way that we present our workforce housing analysis that came from actually a transportation planner in Des Moines, Iowa. And every group of folks that we work with, every student we work with brings a new little piece, improves a new little piece. And we carry that with us to each community thereafter. So I'm always excited to kind of engage in this way. And I hope that you all not only like learn more about the data, but are able to bring new facets of this work to us. And the other thing I was thinking about while actually Christine was talking is, you know, occasionally someone will ask me, do you get bored of doing this, you know, in each place throughout Virginia? And then sometimes over again, right? The New River Valley, one of the first regional housing studies we did in Virginia, is queuing up to do a second version of their study. And I always say no, because every community is different. And so I'll caution, even though I'm about to give you some larger themes that I feel like do connect across Virginia, that each community weighs these differently and views them a little bit differently and put their goals in different places in these overarching themes. So they're, you know, they're just overarching themes. So when we start thinking about individuals and people, very often we're thinking about the challenges that the people in our community experience. Their housing is not safe. Their housing is not stable. Their housing doesn't exactly meet their needs. They can't find housing. And we shape our goals to respond to the issues that we see. So we want housing to be maybe affordable to a certain group, to everybody, to the people we're trying to attract to our community, whoever. And we want them to stay in our community. So we want them to feel like they have opportunity that comes from that housing and everything that housing entails. When I talk about housing, we're not just talking about the roof over our head, right? We're talking about the neighborhood we live in, the community that we live in, the access that we have to jobs, the access that we have to our families, to the environment. All of that matters when we choose where we live. And you know, we're hoping to create housing that is accessible in sort of the literal word, you know, can you get into your house and function within your house? But also, you know, are you able to access the housing that gives you the most opportunity, that gives you the best living situation, really the appropriateness of the housing. And then we think about the impacts that housing has on the health of us as individuals. Again, you can kind of think in the mental health realm, you know, the stress that you endure when your house doesn't meet your needs, or you can think in the physical health realm, you know, what your body must endure when your home involves hazards to your physical health, but then also your community's health, right? So how do people who are in safe, stable housing contribute to the community versus those who are struggling to maintain their housing or live in their housing. And what would our community look like if everybody who lived there was safe and stable? So that's kind of what we think through as we're going across the state. Keep going, Lori Jean, please. Thank you. Now we're down to the housing units, and the sticks and bricks are very often easier to examine and think about, what is going on that is causing us to endure these problems and try to create these goals that we're just talking about for households. So almost everyone is experiencing market tightness, and that can be caused by a variety of issues. The idea is we just simply don't have enough housing that's out there available to people, and everything that word entails, right? So it might be poor housing conditions. We have a lot of housing, but a lot of that housing is in poor condition, isn't really suitable. We want to build more housing, but it's expensive and repairs are expensive. Okay, we can afford it, right? We've lined up grant after grant and we have this great repair program and we can reach, 4,000 people next year. But we can't find a contractor. Or, we finally got that federal home loan bank money, but we can't find a contractor. The construction industry's capacity, it just simply hasn't recovered fully since really 2008. And as such, it's hard to keep up with demand because we don't have the capacity, and we actually have communities competing for the capacity in the state and in neighboring states. And then there's a fair amount of controversy over how we develop housing, who should access our community, what types of housing should be available. And there's so many facets of why, the vast majority of people with good intentions argue over the type of housing. And a lot of it, is related to the choices that we have to make based on our limited resources. Then, density and sprawl tends to be part of that conversation. One of the very common things that I hear, whether I work in a rural place or an urban place, whether I work in a very high density urban place or sort of a low density urban place, is there's nowhere to build. And it is very common to need to think out of the box about where to build and how to build. And again, make choices that very often relate back to costs. It is in some ways cheaper to build in a greenfield scenario, depending on what your perspective is. And it is in some ways cheaper to build where there's already infrastructure in a more dense perspective, or a more dense setting, again, depending on your perspective. And, there are economic tenets and land use tenets and different kinds of perspectives that may help us make those choices, right? But no one way is right or wrong. And that's why we have to work so closely with communities to understand where their priorities are, what they have to work with, so that we can help them make choices around density and sprawl and the mix thereof, right? There isn't one or the other, right? We're choosing sprawl or we're choosing density. So these are complex decisions, and they're not, as a researcher, ethically mine to make, right? They're yours to make. You live there. It's your community. And so we try to shape things based on what you guys want. And so Lori Jean, go ahead. The end goal of all of this, right, is beyond us. This is my planner piece speaking here, right? I will not be here eventually, but my house probably will still be here, making a part of a community. And you know, the generations that will live here afterward, we're setting them up hopefully for success, right? We're thinking about maintaining or increasing our quality of life. We are thinking about economic growth, attracting it or managing it. Most places are, you know, either in that we want to grow more or we want to manage our growth. And then again, maintaining or developing community. And we don't have people living in our community without them having a place to live. And you know, as housers, we like to feel like housing is a human right, something everybody needs a place to live. And you know, there are some variations on that, right? We want to be a bedroom community. Everybody lives here, they work over there, or we're a tourism community, and we want to try to keep the residents small and just invite people in some of the time, right? But that's all about managing growth, managing your economic development. And so again, the goals of the community are what we have in mind, and we want to help make sure that folks have the data and analysis. Lord Jean, keep going. The data and analysis that they need to make decisions based on an accurate account of the housing market. I think it's very important that, you know, we paint a picture that you can rely on, that you can, you know, think about the trends and the talk around you and say, is that real in my community? So help dispel any kind of myths, and let you know what the data says about supply and demand gaps and needs. But we also want to answer your questions and address your concerns. So we want to do a little bit deeper digging where you need it based on your experience in your community. And then of course, we really want to build capacity in your community. Another cool thing, the first time I did this, and I knew that I was just going to do it forever, right? Taught a community how to use the data. I was in Des Moines, Iowa, and about 2 years later, a planner from Des Moines called me up and said, we have this huge housing proposal rezoning that we're considering. She had done all of this analysis to respond to this proposal, which happened again, 2 years after we had finished the study. She wanted to update the data and think this through, and called me up and said, okay, I've done it all. Is it right? And it was right. She was able to like update our study in order to respond to the rezoning proposal that was in front of her. And, you know, from then on, I was just like, okay, we're doing this in every single community. So we haven't done it in every single community, but close to that. And then we want to build practical solutions that, you know, again, advance your local goals and choices. I want to underscore choices, right? Because we can't achieve everything, right? We have to make choices, and that's a lot of time what drives our strategy. And, you know, in order to maximize the resources we do have, though, we want to partner, we want to think regionally, and then again, we want to work within sort of reality of the market context. So that's what we're up to. That's what I hope that you all will get out of it. And now I'll hand it over to Jonathan to talk through exactly how we're going to do that.
Thanks, Mel, for setting the stage. It's great to speak to all of you this afternoon, and I will try to be somewhat brief, but make sure I cover, I think, some important points about what to expect, not just over the coming months, but perhaps most importantly, throughout all this work, what to expect when we transition eventually to talking about solutions and building recommendations that will, you know, our goal is help get you to the housing objectives and key housing goals that your community and the region will decide throughout this work that you already have, you know, are thinking about on a daily basis, and know you want to try to achieve. So as Lori Jean mentioned earlier on in the presentation, we will be doing a lot of work over the summer and the fall. Really just absorbing is the best way to describe it. Absorbing all of the different information, context, background, challenges, opportunities that you all as local experts and practitioners who know what's going on in your communities, that is important for us before we even really dig into the numbers and even begin thinking about possible ideas to recommend as solutions down the road, we need to know what's going on. We need to know what you have anxiety about, what you have hope about, and what you want to see come out of the study and come out of your housing markets in your community. So we'll have these local listening sessions with local officials later this month. Throughout the rest of the year, we will then have focus groups and interviews with people from throughout the housing and real estate and homelessness services sectors, everybody who touches the housing world in some way. We want to make sure that we get your input through focus groups or talking to you one-on-one in some way, and the PDC will be helping us set those up and identify the right people to be in those conversations. Mel will undertake the data trainings that she talked about, which I think is a really really critical and key part of this work that makes it unique and sets it apart from other just kind of very transactional reports and studies that come along for different issues in communities. And then by the end of the year, we'll also have a literature review to try to dissect and really understand some of the bigger macro level issues that are affecting housing challenges and policy opportunities in the region at the federal and state level, and how can we use all of that kind of foundational information to try to hone what we want to focus on in the study with your input, and what we can do in terms of solutions to offer. We'll have an initial needs assessment that will be built on all these conversations and some of the preliminary data that Mel will put together. And throughout all this, we'll also be putting together a toolkit, or just a collection of all the different existing resources, policies, and programs in the region currently that we will begin building in these conversations that we have with all of you to understand, okay, what is the full scope and breadth of things that are already happening in communities throughout the PDC? What are some that are working pretty well and maybe need to be supported further and expanded? What are some ones that maybe need some rethinking or reorientation in some way to better serve changing needs, or needs that we can project will be coming into the future? And what are some things that maybe need to get rethought completely? And these are probably a lot of things that your locality, your community are already talking about in some form, which is why it's important to, just talk to you first before we begin digging into any particular program documentation or policy documents to get that important context. So Lori Jean, if you go to the next slide, I will try to describe in a little more just kind of at a high level what you can expect by this time next year, and what we are trying to achieve by this time next year. First of all is to have forged and created really strong relationships with folks like you on this call and your partners and the people that you work with on a daily basis, so that we can have those initial meetings with you and others, but also know that we can reach out if we have questions, that you can reach out if you have questions or new things arise in your work, because this is going to be such an extended process. Things will change. That is just the nature of this work and the housing environment. Economic conditions, new employers that will come in and all of a sudden have the need to find housing for 100 new workers. The policy environment at the federal level is extremely volatile at this moment. There are changes that we can expect at the state level and the General Assembly next year, most likely. So it's important to have good working relationships, not just with the PDC as consultants, but also with you all and partners on the ground. Ideally, by this point, we will have also a really full, rich understanding of what those housing needs are throughout the region within individual communities and at a high level. And then also just have a strong knowledge of all the different housing initiatives and policies that are underway, that have been talked about, or that maybe you all have said, hey, this is something that we're beginning to think about a little bit. And it could be something that we provide additional resources and information and best practices on as part of our engagement with you. And so ultimately what we want is a solid, strong foundation to then begin forging these customized strategies or solutions over the second half of the timeline for this work. And so just to make sure you've got a good understanding of how we think about approaching these solutions and what you can expect in them, this is a regional and local housing study. So we will be producing solutions for the region as a whole. These are things that would likely have significant PDC involvement, but maybe don't have to, or the PDC plays a coordinating role along with localities and other partners, other regional level partners. There are partnership level strategies that we also like to explore in these studies, which are solutions between 2 or 3 different localities because of a particular issue or challenge or opportunity within their own submarket as part of the whole region. So it may not be something that has to be across everybody, but it is something that perhaps the city and Albemarle can work on together, or 2 other localities that share an important corridor that goes through them, and they're trying to determine the best land use growth strategies with respect to residential growth along their border. So we don't have to have those, but if there are opportunities that arise in our conversations and our work, then we want to make sure that those are an option. And then finally, the vast majority of the words that will be produced for the solutions will be in the form of strategies developed and tailored to particular jurisdictions, to municipalities. And the audience for these are the locality staff and elected officials and agencies and other partners that would be implementing them within that particular community. So we'll have recommendations at those different geographic levels. A couple other important things to note about our approach for this is that, number one, we favor quality over quantity. A lot of other housing studies in the past, including some that we have done, provide at the end of the day a very rich, diverse, and lengthy menu of different options for a community to then try to decide, okay, which ones of these make sense for us to pursue. But there really isn't a lot of meat on the bone for those. Our approach, on the other hand, is about, as Mel described earlier, taking the ideas and the recommendations and challenges you will identify for us and working hand in hand to produce very detailed roadmaps for a small collection, no more than 4, usually 3 or so recommendations that we write for you, that aren't just boilerplate things that we copy and paste into the report, but are things that we are adapting to work specifically for you, or new recommendations that we are really forging for the first time that we've never recommended to any community before because of a specific and unique problem that we were trying to address alongside you. And just to try to give a little bit of demarcation to the solutions that we provide, we always try to provide a couple that we call primary. These primary solutions are your big strategic priorities that we identify with you throughout the process. These are things that you probably have already been thinking about or are going to be, our suggestions to address the big issue or some of the big issues and challenges that continuously arise in the conversations and in the data within your community. So they're going to be more detailed. They're going to be longer, well over 1,000 words. But we also want to provide, space for what we call secondary solutions. These are recommendations that don't have quite as many words and that maybe require some additional homework. So they're good things to think about because you want to make sure they're kind of in a plan, that you're thinking about them, that you're making sure that your, elected officials and other partners are aware that this is something that you as a local community are interested in pursuing, but maybe you need some it's just going to take longer to line up some funding. You want to do some additional research to determine whether or not it's going to be the right fit, or it's pending some other major, federal or state policy reform or funding opportunities. So just a few more pieces maybe need to fall in line before you're ready to undertake one of those. But it's, when you're cooking dinner, you need that, the thing on the front burner that's going to be your entree, but you need your side dishes on the back burner. So that back burner has an important role, and we want to make sure that we include those solutions in this work. We consider a lot of different things as we have these conversations with you, whether or not the impact is going to be limited or significant, how much effort is going to be required in terms of local capacity and capacity among partners, different agencies and nonprofits, and what is the window of opportunity from just a political perspective, right? Localities have lots of other issues they need to consider: schools, transportation, housing is one of those. It's an important one, but we understand that housing has to fit into all of those other challenges. And so we ultimately want to recommend these solutions that have some chance of actually happening and making progress as our role wraps up for this work. These are some of the things that you'll see in every solution. So we have kind of a standard template for them, but the content that goes within each of these different buckets obviously is very different and unique, but we try to present them in a format that is approachable and readable and understandable, both for experts and laypersons alike. So we're not trying to lock them up in super technical formats and languages. And this is just a flow chart of, our process for how we approach this. We take all of the information and knowledge and notes from, the first year of this work. And then we come back to each community and to the region with some just initial ideas, some spaghetti that we can throw against the wall to bounce around and say, these are some of the priorities we heard. Here are some things that we're seeing in other communities. Here's some ideas that we have. Which ones do you want to focus on? And so we'll narrow that list down and then produce a partial draft of some solutions. Ideally, at that point, we're down to those 3 or 4 per community. And then we'll come back to you all for feedback on those partial drafts and finally build them out into the full complete versions that then get incorporated into the final report. And so the key deliverables that you can expect at the end of the day, as they mentioned earlier in the presentation, this technical report, which is going to be that big giant PDF that takes forever to download, which will be useful for the people who are ultimately responsible for implementing these solutions and want to pour through all the data in the appendices. But we will use all of that content to build this consumer report, which is really just a beefed up executive summary. And you'll see some examples of that on the next slide. We can share links to these. They're also on both of the respective PDC websites, which are easily Googleable. But these are the 2 most recent regional housing studies that Mel and I have finished for other regions in the Commonwealth, the Central Shenandoah PDC and the Southside PDC. So kind of towards your northwest and then further down to your south. These regions are kind of similar, lots of rural areas and some kind of central urbanized areas, if you can call Danville a urbanized area, maybe. But I think there's a lot that we've learned from these 2 studies that we can apply in our work for TJPDC. But as Mel mentioned earlier, it's always a learning process, always, finding new challenges and new issues to try to tackle. And we look forward to doing that work with all of you in the coming months and coming years. So there's the websites for our 2 organizations and Lori Jean's contact. And so at this point, I will hand it back off to her to slide us into Q&A and wrap us up.
Thank you both. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a few minutes for questions. You can write them in the chat. I don't think I've seen anything in the Q&A, so please feel free to write questions for Mel and Jonathan in the chat or for myself, and we will take some time to answer them.
Lori, while we're waiting, this is just an awesome moment to emphasize that, we're here to work with you, and we're excited to work with you. And we hope that you're excited to work with us too. And I will say the more information you throw at us, the better your questions are, the more considerations you have us make, the more fun this is for us. And the more fun it is, the more time we want to spend on you. So we often find that, within these bigger PDC studies, those localities who get really engaged and, really make us work, are the ones that get the most out of it. So I encourage you to, simmer over everything here. And even if you don't have questions right this second, to send us questions as they come to your mind. I'd rather have more information and more things to read and think over than less. So here's a question.
So we have been informed that the chat is not working for folks. So yes, if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A. I apologize for that misguidance. Yes. And please do follow up with me at my email there. Anything that comes up for you as you're thinking about what was shared today. I think one of my major takeaways just from working with Mel and Jonathan so far is that this is so different from a typical study that maybe we would get some data and then we'd have to go figure out what to do with it ourselves and maybe not know how to make sense of it. Or maybe from some outsider who didn't get to know us and didn't know how to make sense of our data because they didn't actually talk to us. This is much more hands-on, and that's why it's going to take us a little while. But I think the product is going to be much more useful than a typical study would be, where we're going to have these action items that we work on with Jonathan, that we are then working all together within our localities and as a region to actually implement. It's not going to only be sort of a document that gets sent out there and left in the ether, but that we're actually going to have strategies that we're all kind of buying into and that we know the next steps for. So I hope that that is exciting for folks. Thank you for your comments here, guys.
There's two questions. One is definitely for Jonathan, how local economic development authorities can provide opportunities and strategies. They just say they're interested in learning about it, Jonathan, but I know that this is something you've been thinking about. So I don't know if you want to make a quick comment.
Sure, just that EDAs and IDAs throughout the Commonwealth have really started to get more interested and active in housing conversations and housing policy and housing programs at the local level. I know I just kind of ribbed on Danville a little bit, but their IDA is really, I think, at the vanguard of that and coming out with incentives to attract new housing in and along properties within the city that are strategic targets for reinvestment and that contribute to broader economic development goals. You can't attract jobs unless you have homes for the people that you want to work those jobs. So there has been a lot of progress and a lot of energy that has accelerated over the past couple of years among the economic development community. And so EDAs are going to be a really important stakeholder in this process. I'm sure EDAs will probably be represented in some of the listening sessions that we have, and certainly within the focus groups. And if we end up not reaching any EDA folks that we should at the end of that, we will talk to them regardless. Because they are a really key player that have access to different resources and capabilities that sometimes local governments themselves can't always actualize. So I'd be happy to talk to any economic development folks from the region throughout this process to make sure they're involved and know exactly how they can contribute to their community's housing objectives.
Lori, do I have time to talk about transportation?
You have 30 seconds.
Oh boy, 30 seconds to talk about transportation. So transportation is inextricably connected to housing, and it is very often the second most expensive thing for a household behind housing. Childcare kind of bumps up there sometimes. But we think about transportation heavily as we think about defining a market and what markets you guys are connected to. We also think about it in relation to housing resources that already exist. So I can't go into every way we think about transportation and commuting patterns, but I assure you that we are thinking about that. And you know, if it rises to the top for your community, we have before made recommendations around the housing and transportation connections. So
Thank you. I know we had one more question about the trainings, if you could take 10 seconds.
Yeah. 10 seconds on the trainings. They will be an hour apiece. If you are in a certain role, you may also have some homework in between. We will have 5 to 7 trainings, and they will take you through most of the publicly available data or the local administrative data that you have at your fingertips to think through housing. At a minimum, they will show you what's out there and help you ask us better questions. At a maximum, it will allow you to do your own analysis over the years.
Thank you. Since folks are still on here, I'm going to just let us do these last questions. And I understand that participants, you may need to leave, but if you're able to stay and you want to hear these questions answered, the next question was just about how will you determine which solutions are classified as primary versus secondary for each locality? Will they have the flexibility to adjust will each locality have the flexibility to adjust these priorities as conditions change?
Yes, is the answer to the second question. And the answer to the first one is really, it just depends on the context of each community that we work with. Generally, what we do is provide, you know, that first step in offering some initial options for solutions is, you know, provide a few different ideas within some broader categories of the different issues that are, you know, addressed in the listening sessions and in the data. And so once we have that list of, you know, 3 or 4 to work with, that's one of the first things that we talk about with the local stakeholders and officials that we are engaging in this process is, okay, based on, you know, how you feel about your capacity, what existing initiatives you have going on, and, you know, the level of need that you see for these different issues, what do you want to be your priority things that, you know, are really at the top of the flagpole in the study for your community. And plenty of times over the course of drafting these solutions, sometimes primary stuff gets bumped down to secondary and vice versa. And that's just because conditions change. And, you know, ultimately, while there will be a point in the study where we have to call time and put everything into the final report that gets published, you know, this is not any binding, you know, policy or recommendations or gets codified in any particular way. It is a resource for localities and communities to use moving forward, however they see fit. And I think an important thing to keep in mind is that both Housing Forward and the center, who Mel represents, you know, we have public missions to serve you all and to serve your communities and to, you know, to help you achieve your housing goals, you know, forever. And so even though, you know, ultimately our, you know, paid engagement to do this work and produce this product for your communities, for the region will come to an end, you know, we don't hide our emails very well. So you can contact us and ask us, hey, this is, you know, how things have developed, you know, 6 months after the study came out. You know, what do you recommend? And we're happy to, you know, share our thoughts and try to direct you in whatever direction might be useful, and are open to, you know, dedicated technical assistance opportunities later on down the road too, to actually really try to implement some things. So we recognize things are fluid, things change, and we try to account for that throughout this process.
Thank you.
The next question is about soils, and I want to just address this like broadly and maybe use it also to emphasize the importance of your guys' participation. So, you know, as you're building housing, you're thinking about the soil, you're thinking about the rock, you're thinking about the water, you're thinking about all kinds of environmental issues that either prevent a certain type of housing or make another type of housing more appropriate, don't allow for housing at all. I am not a soil scientist. I am not an engineer. I am not a transportation planner. And, all of these, I'm not a childcare provider. And all of these things are facets of what helps us make the best housing choices that we can. And so that's why the community participation, the staff participation, the stakeholder participation is so important, because in order in 2 years to wrap our minds around all of these conditions, we have to have more than just me and Jonathan and, our staff, right? So that's why we think that this approach is so successful, because we can get into that kind of question because we are able to work with your town planner or your, county engineer or whoever that we need to in order to help individual localities make good decisions. Yeah. So. Or you're muted. You need not be.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for asking those questions, and Mel and Jonathan for answering so thoroughly. And thank you everyone for staying. I'm going to hand it to Ruth just to close us out.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for your time and engagement in this presentation today. Your participation in this kickoff meeting really demonstrates the shared commitment we have across our region to addressing housing challenges thoughtfully and collaboratively. We had a lot of different perspectives in the room, and I really hope you all will be engaged throughout the process. We've talked about, why this study is important, how the study is going to be conducted, and our timeline and deliverables along that timeline. But this is not just about data collection analysis. It's about creating tailored local and regional solutions with a clear implementation roadmap. And I think that's so unique and important for our region. But your engagement throughout the process is what's going to make this really happen. So over the coming weeks, stay tuned as you'll receive information about the trainings, data collection opportunities to participate, opportunities for stakeholder input and review. We'll maintain regular communication through our normal channels, but share information about the study with your networks, your communities. Broader awareness and engagement will only make this better. We're committed to being transparent and being accountable throughout this process. You heard about stakeholder feedback for the strategies and about the comprehensive technical and accessible consumer reports that will both be made available publicly. One thing to think about, the housing challenges we're facing need both policy solutions and coordinated implementation efforts. This is not something that we are going to be able to just write down a policy solution, hand it to you all, and it's going to magically fix everything. We need the people who can make decisions and implement solutions to be at the table to make this really be useful to our community. So with that, please, if you have questions or suggestions about this project, reach out to our team here, either myself or Lori Jean Talloon. And thank you again for your commitment to this important work. Together, we can make housing solutions that serve the region's diverse needs and strengthen our communities. Again, thank you everyone for coming.